Hey everyone, after some questions that have been raised on my DeviantArt account, I've decided that I'm going to make a brief tutorial on SolidWorks to explain and demonstrate the differences between solid modeling and mesh modeling. And that way, people who use CAD are already familiar with this, but most people who use studio modeling software like 3ds Max or Maya or Cinema 4D, Blender, all those programs are surface modelers, and they require the user to manipulate polygonal meshes. In solid modeling, you don't need to worry about surfaces at all. Surfaces are a side effect of the geometry that you create. So, I've got SolidWorks up already. I've got a few little practice drawings that we're going to work on. I've got this part. We'll do this one. Probably start with this one. This one, no. We'll do this one first. Little simple guy here. So I'm going to minimize that and move that over on my second monitor here so I can see what I'm doing. When you open up SolidWorks, got a blank screen. First thing you want to do is hit the New Page button. And you have three options to pick from. You have Part, Assembly, and Drawing. Drawing is essentially what you do in AutoCAD, if you're familiar with that. I don't recommend drawing in SolidWorks because it kind of defeats the entire purpose of the software to begin with. Assembly is okay to use once in a while, right away from a fresh document, but I recommend always starting with a part. And the reason is because it's going to save that part as its own individual file, and you'll be able to make an assembly from that part later on. So I have part selected already. I'm going to click OK. That's going to bring me into my blank modeling space. And I had SolidWorks up and running already, so my tabs are a little messed up. But by default, SolidWorks is going to open, and it's going to be on the Sketch tab here. So, the first thing you're going to want to do is click Sketch, and it brings up your datum planes. So you can select from front plane, top plane, and right plane. And depending on the shape you're making is going to really dictate which plane you want to start with. And I'll bring this over again so we can take a look at it. My rule of thumb is whatever face has the most detail is the plane you're going to want to start with. And judging on our picture here, you can see the front view definitely gives us the most definition and the most contours to work with. So we're going to start on the front plane. So I'm going to select front plane, and it's going to zoom in and bring my viewport normal to the front plane, which means I'm looking completely perpendicular to the front plane. So your basic drawing commands are line, rectangle, slot, circle, arc, polygon, spline, ellipse, and fillet. There's also text and point, and those are useful. Text is obviously useful if you want to emboss your model with text or symbols or something. Points are really only useful for a very complex kind of modeling called lofting, which won't be explained in this tutorial, but maybe later on down the road I'll make a lofting tutorial. Anyway, you can also see that all these commands have drop-down menus next to them. Line also has center line, which is used exactly as it's described as a center line, or as a construction line. It's used as both. Underneath rectangle, you have about 5 different ways to make rectangles. Parallelogram is obviously not a rectangle, but it is under the rectangle command. The two that I use almost 100% of the time are center rectangle and corner rectangle. I've never really used the other two because they don't really seem that useful. Not in the context I use rectangles anyway. Parallelogram I've used on occasion. Slot is an incredibly useful tool. Most people who are familiar with elongated holes probably start out with two circles connected with two parallel lines, and then they trim out the interior walls of the circles to make it a long slot. The slot command does that for you immediately. You just pick center point, and drag your slot, and it's done. And then you get into dimensioning it and defining the shape of it, and we'll get into that once I start drawing, but I'm going to delete that quick. On top of just your generic slot, you've got about 3 different kinds of slots you can pick from, and each one is its own independent command, which is really nice and saves a lot of time when you're modeling. Circle, you can either do a 3-point circle, or in this case a perimeter circle. All that's doing is you're selecting 3 points and it's going to generate a circle tangent to those points. Or a center circle, which you pick the center point and then define the radius, and that's your circle. The arc, you a center point arc where you pick the center and then you sweep your arc around the screen. I guess I can demonstrate that quick. Just pick a point and then sweep it, and it will make the arc longer or shorter, whatever your intent with the arc is. Tangent arc, if I have a line here, and I want an arc tangent to that, I can pick, oh yeah, I gotta pick the line, and then wherever I put this arc here, okay, it's not working exactly as intended. Well, it made that arc tangent to this, which is what we would have wanted, but let's see what I'm doing wrong here. I don't really ever use this one either because I like to define the arc myself. Oh, I see what it's doing. Okay, this arc that we're sweeping is going to be tangent perpendicular to this line. So if we draw a line here, now we have a tangent arc there. Yeah, and I've never used that before, so I don't really worry about it. The other commands, I rarely use ellipses, and splines are more useful in a 3D sketch than they are in a 2D sketch. Maybe you have applications that are useful for you, but for me I don't really use it. And fillet is useful in sketches, definitely, and chamfers. You can do that right in the sketch, that way you don't have to worry about doing it later on the 3D part itself. But now that I've got the basic commands laid out for you, I'm going to bring this up so we can start modeling it. Move this guy over here. I like to start out using the origin while I'm modeling, because if you can relate everything to the origin, it makes things a lot easier down the road when you want to start making assemblies and stuff. So first thing we're going to start with is an arc. And it doesn't have to be exact right away, we just want to get a general arc down. I'm going to draw a center line quick. I'm going a little quick, I'm sorry. What I just did was, when I was done drawing that arc, if you hit escape, it brings you out of the command so you can select a new one. And then when you're, like if I draw, you know, this, and I hit escape, I'm out, so I can pick a new tool again. Or I can hit enter and start in another location using the same tool. Alright, so now what I want to do is Need one more center line here. And I want the end of this line segment to be the midpoint of this one. So I have that point selected. You can see it highlighted blue there. I'm going to hold Control down, and I'm going to select this hidden line here. And then I'm going to click midpoint. It's automatically going to snap my geometry to that location. Next, I want to fix the center of this arc to the origin. So I'm going to do that again. I'm going to select that point. I'm going to hold Control and click the origin. Then I'm going to click coincident. I'm going to hit enter, and it's finished. Alright, next, line tool. And I'm just going to sketch the general shape of this part. I'm only going to draw half of it because I'll be able to use a command called mirror, which will take everything that's on either side of this part that I select and will mirror it over a common center line. So after I've got this sketched out generally, we're going to start dimensioning it. And this is 15. This is 35. And the nice thing about SolidWorks is you can just sketch the general shape of whatever you're making first and go back in and add the dimensions later. And if you'll notice, my lines are turning black as I add dimensions to them. What that's doing is the dimensions are actually constraining where those lines sit. So after they turn black, they're unable to be moved. I can't drag them and move them around anymore. And that's what we want. That's a good thing. And let's see. Another thing I can do too is I'm not given a dimension of the slot that's open right here, and I know I want to be halfway there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a line from this point to this point, hit enter, or actually escape. I'm going to select this line and I'm going to tell it to be vertical. That will automatically snap that line exactly where I need it to go. So now we're going to go up here to the mirror command, and you have two dialog boxes to fill in. The first box are the entities you wish to mirror. So you're going to select everything on one side of the center line that you want to be reflected over it. And then you click mirror about, and then you select your center line, and it'll give you a yellow preview. And if you like what you see, just hit enter, and there it is. So now we've got our profile. You can see I've got it drawn right here. And next we need to extrude it 40 millimeters. So I'm going to go to Features, Extrude, and right here lets me define the distance I want to extrude it. 40. I like that, so I'm going to hit enter. And you can see my sketch is still highlighted in the background. That's in case if I hit enter again, it will let me go back in and edit it. If I like what I'm seeing, I just click in white space and it'll deselect that. And there's our model. You can see right there, we've got it exact. So that's a simple little model to work with and start out right there. So that's a good warm-up, but what if we want to start making something harder? We'll do a multi-feature model next. Something like this. This will be a nicer one to work with, because it'll give me the opportunity to demonstrate more commands. As you can see with this model here, it only took me one feature to create that, and that was our part. After that we were done. But we want to make a new part that's going to require a few more steps. So we'll minimize this one for now. And maybe I'll model it like this so you can actually see the part and what I'm drawing. Yeah, that's good. Okay. We're done with this one. I'm not going to save it. So again, I'm going to go up to New Page, Part, hit OK. Maximize that. I'm going to go to my Sketch tab, click Sketch. Now, based on what I'm looking at, the front and the top view are given along with an isometric view. And really, you could start with either of them. I'm going to start with the front view just because that's my preference. So I'm going to click the front plane, and you really want to think in the processes that it's going to take to create this model. You really want to think ahead of how you're going to lay it out in order to get from point A to point B, A being a sketch to B the completed model. And based on what I'm looking at the front view here, I'm actually going to draw this whole profile as one right away and just ignore what I already know is going to be a rib. So I'm going to start out right at the origin, draw the general shape of this thing. I'm going to dimension it. And 9. Alright. Now I'm going to go to Features, Extrude, and the total width is let's see here. $21.30. Oh, well, I actually should have known that since we've got a diameter of 30 there. Should have looked for that. Anyway, okay, we're going to extrude that 30. Actually, I'm going to do something a little different this time. We're going to go 15, and then I'm going to open up direction 2, and I'm also going to do 15. What that's doing is it's splitting the direction of the extrusion between the front plane. So my sketch is on the front plane, and my extrusion direction is bilateral. So it's going behind the plane and in front of the plane. So we've got that. Now we've got a radius back here, and all we have to do is fillet that. So I'm going to select fillet, and have the 30 as 15. Select this edge, select the back edge, hit enter. We've got that, and then we're going to do 2 cuts. The first cut, I'm going to do the rib. So I'm going to select sketch again. Now I could do this rib multiple ways. I like to do things in as few steps as possible. So if I wanted to do it in multiple steps, I could sketch on this face, draw that triangle, extrude cut it back this way till I get to the point I want. Then I could mirror that over this figure and get it to cut out of the back. But we could actually cut this out in one step, and you could either start on the top plane or top face or the right face. It'll do the same thing for us. So I'm just going to choose the top. Click sketch. There we go. If you click spacebar, it'll bring up your view port window. That will let you pick the orientation of how you want to look at your shape. I want to look at it from the top, so I'm going to double click top, and we're looking at it from the top now. Now I'm going to use the rectangle command, and I'm going to snap to this corner and then just to this edge somewhere. And I like that, so I'm going to hit escape. Then I'm going to go up to line, and I'm going to choose center line. And I'm going to draw a center line right in the center of my part. And hit escape. And I'm going to dimension the rib. And I know the rib itself is 7 millimeters. So 30 minus 7 is 33. 33 divided by 2. If you don't know what 33 divided by 2 is, you can actually write it in to the dimension command. It acts as a calculator, so if I type that in, it will automatically make that 16.5. And actually, that was wrong. I meant 23, not 33. So I'm going to do 23 divided by 2, 11.5, obviously. And then you're going to mirror that. So we'll select just the rectangle. Then we're going to select mirror about. Click the center line. And if I rotate my shape by clicking the mouse or middle mouse button and rotating, you can see my rectangles there. And now we're going to go to the feature tab and hit extruded cut. And we want them to go down 21 millimeters. As you can see, it lines up right to that edge. I also could have went up to next, and I can choose that edge, and it will extrude right to that edge. So if I don't necessarily know the dimension of that, I can just click that line, and it will extrude right there. Or it doesn't like that. What do I want to pick here? Up to next. Oh, okay. Probably right here. There we go. So there's our rib. Now we're just missing one last piece, which is the hole that goes through it. So again, I'm going to click sketch, pick the top surface, look down at it from the top, and I'm going to hover over the arc here until the center point appears. Then I'm just going to click there, and my circle will automatically be fixed to share that center point. Then I'm going to dimension my circle, and it has a radius of 7.5, so we'll do 15. Features, extruded cut. This time we want to go through the entire shape, so I could type in 30, or I could just go through all, hit OK, and there you have it. So that was a 3-feature object. Fillets don't count as features. Fillets are just modifications to a feature. So we did this one in 3 features, and that's the least amount of work you could have done to make this. Yeah, I don't know if there's any way you could have done that in any fewer possible moves. Oh, actually, I'm sorry, we're not done. I just noticed some chamfers. If you see here, it's telling us that these chamfers are 9 by 9, so we know that they're at a 45-degree angle because of that. So if I go over to my modifiers up here, I'm going to select chamfer underneath the fillet drop down menu, and I'm going to modify that to be 9 millimeters. They default at 45 degrees, so you won't ever have to change the angle unless you want it different than 45 degrees. Select the two edges that I want to chamfer. Hit OK. And there we have it. Now our shape is complete. And that gets these two little simpletons out of the way. Now we'll do a harder one. I'm liking this one right here. I've had my eye on this one. So this guy be a little tougher to do. Not much, but it'll definitely demonstrate a few more options that we can work with. Let me get this out of the way. I'll put him right here. We'll close this one out. Go up to new. Alright, now there's a few possibilities for where we could start with this one. I'm going to recommend, for easiness, start at using the top plane. So I'm going to click Sketch, Top Plane, and I'm going to start with this circle here. And I'm going to start right at the origin. And we've got a diameter of 1.5. I'm assuming this one's in inches, but I'm just going to keep SolidWorks in millimeters, and we'll just pretend this is a really small part to something. So we've got 1.5, and I'll zoom in with my mouse wheel. Get this dimension in here. If you double click your mouse wheel, it will fit it to the screen better. Okay, and the outside has a radius of 1.37. So we're going to draw another circle with the same center point and dimension that. And 1.37 times 2. And then we know from the center the plate is 1 inch in either direction. So I'm going to draw a center line here. Horizontal. That little green box lets me know that it's fixed at horizontal, which is what I want. And then the distance from the center of the circle to the edge of the plate is 3.5. And now I'm going to use the offset command, and I'm going to offset in both directions, so I want to pick bi-directional. Hit OK. And I've got some excess lines here, so I want to trim those. I'm going to click Trim. And it's defaulted on a tool called Power Trim, which lets me just click and drag my mouse over the line I want to cut, and it automatically trims it. Hit Enter or OK when you're done. And actually, I should have trimmed this too. Okay. I'm going to close the back of our bottom here. And then we're going to extrude it. 0.37. So there's the base. Now what we could do is, in the least amount of steps, we could extrude these two arms here up as rectangles, or we could draw on this surface here and extrude it as a solid across this and then subtract the channel out of the middle of there. But I like the idea of the least steps possible, so I am going to sketch them as rectangles. And I'm just going to sketch one so that way I can mirror it. Okay, now I want to extrude them, and they stand 1.75, because the plate is already 0.37, so we can subtract 0.37 off of that 1.37. Add the radius, which is 0.75, so we know that these stand 1.75 off of the base here. Hit OK. And then we're going to fillet our edges. 0.75. OK. And then we have one more fillet to do right here. Actually, 4 fillets. 1, 2, 3, 4. 0.37. Hit OK. Now we've got a series of holes to cut. Sketch. I'm not going to flip my model because I can just snap to the center right from here. 0.75, or no. 0.5. And we're going to extrude cut all the way through. And then we'll do one more hole. Actually, here's a good example of me making a mistake from my first drawing. What I can do now is I could start a new one and right on this surface and cut that hole, or I could go back and modify the existing drawing that I already have to make this base plate, and I'm going to choose to do that so I can keep this as small as possible. So I'm going to go over to my feature tree over here, and I'm going to click the plus next to Boss Extrude 1, and I have sketch 1 here. That's the sketch I used to make that shape, and I'm going to click Edit Sketch. And now what I can do is I can come in here and draw that circle that I missed earlier. 0.5, and it's 0.75 in. Now, if I update it, there it is, and I didn't have to add another feature. So now we're done with that part. And we'll fix the shadows here. There we go. Alright, so I think that's the ultimate basics of SolidWorks, is just adding or subtracting from a solid model. As you can see, I've done absolutely nothing with surfaces. I haven't used anything related to polygons or vertices or anything. It's just straight up solids. And if I want to, I'm able to export these. If I save as, I have a laundry list of file extensions to choose from. Aegis, Step, STL, Parasolids. Basically, anything that a regular mesh modeler, any generic file extension can be used in SolidWorks or export out of SolidWorks anyway. And I would be able to share my models with someone who uses mesh software, and they would be able to edit my model in their software. And SolidWorks converts it into a mesh model. But I don't need to do that, so I'm going to close this part since we're done with that one. And I think that concludes my basic tutorial for now. Since I've made this first one, I realized how much I could actually elaborate on and explain, but I think I'm going to save that for future tutorials. That way they don't drag on forever and I can actually upload them at a decent rate. So this will conclude my first tutorial, and check back if you're interested in learning some more SolidWorks. I think I'll start setting up some more tutorials to actually start making useful things and not just abstract components to demonstrate what SolidWorks does. But thanks for watching, and I hope it was educational. And now you'll know the difference between solid modeling and mesh modeling.